You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to episode number 31 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. Today, I'm going to be sharing a conversation that I had with Megan from the UK. We covered many different things in this conversation, and so when choosing a reading for this week, there were many different ways that I could go. Ultimately, I decided to read from a pamphlet from the ISO called Safe and Sexually Sober Meetings, helping women feel welcome in your meeting. And I wanted to read a few paragraphs, and this is kind of skipping through the first couple. A woman walking into her first meeting is in reality no different than any other newcomer. Why then do so many women not return to a place that can offer so much support? There are many reasons. The shame and stigma society places on the female sex addict is particularly intense. In addition, a woman may fear being in a meeting with no other women in attendance, or may feel uncomfortable around other members who aren't maintaining sobriety. Although we cannot control all of the factors which prevent women or any other newcomers from coming back, there is much we can do to help women feel safe and welcome in our meetings. Many of us, male, female, or transgender, came into the fellowship with preconceived ideas about the nature of our addiction. For example, we may not believe that women can be real sex addicts. We may even encourage them to attend meetings in another 12-step fellowship, where they may be more comfortable, furthering this mistaken belief. However, we find when we share together at meetings simply as sex addicts, we are more alike than not. As sex addicts, we have often found ourselves objectifying others regardless of gender. Men and women alike have had difficulties seeing each other as anything but caricatures, exaggerating the other's differences and discounting or denying the similarities. We may have feared acting out with or being triggered by members of another gender. Or we may have concerns about triggering them. Additionally, for those of us in relationships, our partners may be opposed to our attending mixed meetings. Skipping a paragraph, these behaviors, fears, and misconceptions often create barriers between men and women, and even between existing women members and the woman newcomer, pushing us apart rather than drawing us together. However, when we place our trust in a higher power of our own understanding, we are able to join in unity to recover from sex addiction. And skipping to the very end of the pamphlet, the last two sentences, it is our responsibility to keep the meeting safe, sober, and focused on the solution. It is ultimately the newcomer's responsibility to keep coming back. This pamphlet has a lot of different ideas. A lot of them talk about literature, contact lists, and doing group inventories, which I had mentioned in episode number 27. So I'm really happy to hear that the meeting that Megan attended for the first time, that they really made her feel welcome. And you'll get to hear that and so many other things that we covered in this conversation. I'm going to keep this section at the beginning of the podcast as short as possible. And now I'm going to turn it over to that conversation. Here it is. I hope you enjoy it. All right, let's get started. So I'm so grateful to have Megan here with us, coming all the way from the UK.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Awesome. With Tim. I recorded at 7:30 p.m. my time, so it was way early in the morning for him, and very glad to readjust my schedule for you. So it's 6:30 your
Thank you.
time and
Yes.
10:30 a.m. my time. So we're doing this on
Yeah.
a weekend.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. So yeah, to get started, to get to know a person, I like to go over what's in your three circles. It's a great way to figure out what kind of things brought you to program and how you're doing with recovery.
So I'll start with the inner circle, because I think that makes the most sense. My inner circle has developed and changed over the years. But what's in it is being paid for sex, unprotected sex, BDSM relationships, and compulsive masturbation, although now masturbation is a blanket rule, really. And then sort of over the last year, I've added into my inner circle any sexual relationship or any sexual relation outside the boundary of marriage, just because my values have developed and I wanted to align my recovery with that. Prior to that, it was sex outside a committed relationship. So those are the things in my inner circle. And my middle circle is basically anything that glorifies sex.
Oh, wow.
So to me, that means like quite a lot of normal music, secular music, anything. Predominantly, I listen to music that is Christian music, but I will also listen to things that are sort of positive or safe, that's secular, but general kind of modern hit music is full of sex. So listening to any of that can be quite triggering. And TV programs, I actually recently cancelled in England, we have a thing called a TV license, which we have to pay for in order to access the TV.
Wow.
So I cancelled that. So I can watch apps, like Netflix, YouTube things, but like I can't watch normal standard TV. And that's so that I have to actively search for what I want to watch, because if I watch normal TV, there's always kind of sex scenes or like just things that make sex acceptable, and that's really difficult for me. And alcohol is in my middle circle. I've never been an alcoholic, but anytime I have a sip of alcohol, it's very vulnerable for me. And it's a dodgy place to be, because I then typically spurt out all of my addiction history to whoever is in front of me. They're kind of the main, and I guess any kind of situation where I'm in a one-to-one situation with a man physically, like if a man is in my house on my own, I have to really ascertain if that's a safe person for me and for them. And generally I stay clear of that, and I'm quite boundaried around who I give my address to and phone number to and things like that. So they're my kind of middle circle stuff. And masturbation's come in and out, but now it's in the inner.
Yeah.
And then outer circle stuff has really developed, because when I was first in, there's a kind of cliche of like, if you have nothing to put in your outer circle, put your laundry in. Like, just that's what I heard people say in recovery. Like, if you've got nothing better to put in your outer circle, just stick with housework.
Yeah.
But now it is developed, thankfully. So now I have work in my outer circle. I have spending time with my son. I have church, any kind of meeting, or I also am part of a recovery program in addition to SAA that is like specific for Christians in recovery. So that's really beneficial for my recovery as well. And walks and nature, I absolutely love now. I never ever thought I would, but like hearing the birds like chirping is beautiful. Reading, having baths. So like there's so many things now that I enjoy. I was going to the gym a lot, boxing, just I broaden things all the time now that I'm present. So my outer circle develops.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice. Yeah, I'll have to recontextualize laundry because I do the laundry for the house, and I don't often look at it as an outer circle opportunity. Doing the dishes is definitely an outer circle thing for me. When I am stressed, when I full of anxiety, going into the kitchen over there and scrubbing pots, that just kind of clears my mind. I just get into kind of a zen state, and a lot of times I'll listen to music while I'm doing it, and it just takes me out of the environment that was stressing me out. And it was really helpful, but I haven't quite thought about that with laundry, so thank you for that recontextualized that for me.
I think it's more like when you're first in, it's not so much like that you're necessarily getting pleasure out of it, but it's distracting you enough to stop acting out for however long it takes to do laundry, which is enough in the beginning.
Brilliant. Yeah, totally. All right. How long have you been in program?
So on and off for 7 years, consistently for 4. Although a habit of mine, which I tend to touch upon, is that like when getting into relationships, I often slip out of the rooms, which is like the most dangerous thing for me. But yeah, generally, 7 years, but consistently for 4.
Okay. And what, so going back to, let's get back into kind of an earlier state of, how did you grow up, and how did things escalate to bring you to SAA?
So I'm going to go to my notes.
Yeah, no worries.
So when my mum was pregnant with me, they announced the pregnancy. Like, the good news is she's pregnant, but the bad news is we're getting a divorce. And my dad has had a number of wives and fiancés. And I remember asking him one time, like, have you ever been single in your life? And he said, yeah, the first 21 years. And he's a man now in his 70s. So so I think that's had some impact on me. And he is also was always very upfront with his experiences with women, probably more graphically than what we needed to hear. So I kind of internalized this belief, which I hold no bad feeling to my dad for, but I grew up sort of with this inherent belief that the wife loses and the whore wins, because all these stories, the women that were glorified were prostitutes or were women he was having affairs with, not the one he was married to. So I feel like I was always really overtly sexualized, and probably watched pornography for the first time at the age of 11 with some boys at school. And I remember being far more interested than kind of other people, especially girls. And I sort of knew the answers and knew stuff way more than other girls seemed to. And then like, and I don't even know how it progressed, but suddenly as a teen, I went from that one incident of watching pornography to compulsively masturbating. Wow. Like really, really quickly, to a point where it was like a self-harm. So it was like to hurt myself in the end. And it was very addictive even at that point. And I remember kind of addictively messaging boys, and kind of, I had these draft texts on my phone that would be like sexual texts. And then I would just send them to these boys. And it was just really bizarre. I kind of felt right from the off, like right from puberty, that it was like my duty to like perform to male desire. So it was never about love or attraction. It was just kind of like a tick box exercise in a weird way. And it just really quickly escalated. And then it got much worse following a period of an abusive relationship. So when I was 14, I was groomed by an older man. And I was in an abusive relationship with him for 9 months. A lot of sexual abuse and physical abuse. And I think this is where my unprotected sex Inner Circle is born out of, because he really tried to impregnate me by throwing pills out the windows, and
wow.
it was pretty extreme. So, and then when I wasn't pregnant, he was angry about it, but I was secretly taking the pill at home behind his back. So yeah, there was stuff there, and from that, thankfully, I managed to get that ended, but my self-esteem was far lower than it even was to begin with. And then I kind of found faith at this like bizarre encounter when I was 16. Just some random girl at school told me about Jesus, and I listened to it, and I started going to church, and for a year I just like was celibate. So I'd gone from being like overtly sexual, having this abusive experience, and then like I was celibate for a year. I got a purity ring made. I was really enthusiastic about it, but I was an addict in it, and it took over. And obviously at that age, I had no concept of what sexual addiction was. But I returned to compulsive behaviors after about a year of celibacy. And then I kind of often think back whether or not my vulnerabilities kind of led me to being exploited, whether my addiction led me to being like, where was it addiction and where was it exploitation, and where does the responsibility lie? It's quite complicated in my story, because when I was 18, I remember finding myself in a house with 3 men or boys, and I don't remember much about what happened there. I believe that I was drugged, and I know that like 2 of those men had sex with me or raped me up, but like at the same time, my addiction probably led me to agree to get into a situation with those 3 boys, and then yeah, it's really colorful, but that experience, again, because I know I didn't consent to having sex with those men, led to, again, my self-esteem just plummeting even further. But I entered a healthy relationship for a bit, for 2.5 years, but I hadn't addressed any of my trauma or addiction. I hadn't addressed anything. So it was kind of too safe. Like, it was like a happy married life, even though we were young. It was really lovely. There was nothing wrong with the relationship at all. And he was such a fantastic guy. But because I hadn't addressed anything, I randomly ended it after 2.5 years, moved straight in with another guy, and then proceeded to cheat on this other guy. And at this point, I was 21. I came off my contraception. I broke up with this other guy. I just escalated to suddenly being on all these dating apps under the sun. My phone was just an array of dating apps. And it was an array of obscene pictures, videos, conversations with any person. I didn't have to find them attractive. You could just literally talk to anyone on it. There was no kind of no swipe. Like, everyone was a yes.
Yeah.
And I remember I was seeing, in England, we have these things called independent sexual violence advisors, and they're people that help you after you've been sexually exploited.
Wow.
And they help you kind of navigate if you want to report to the police, or whether you want to find counseling, or they just help you navigate that whole process in a world where women are very, like, we have a really low conviction rate here. So they're basically like saying, even if you get no justice through the criminal justice system, what can we do to help you on your healing journey?
Wow.
And I had one of those workers, and she was really cool. And she recognized that my trauma had led me to a place where what I was describing was addiction, and it was dangerous. And some of these men that I was meeting on apps and talking to on apps, like, there was some severe BDSM stuff that I was explaining to her, some really dangerous situations and contracts, like BDSM contracts that I was showing her. And because I was basically crying for help. And she said, get a notebook and write down in a 24-hour period, every time you talk to a man, go on a dating app, have sex, have any sexual relation, masturbate, anything, just write it down in a notebook, 7:05 a.m., 7:10 a.m., whatever, throughout the day. And I did that, and it did start about 7 o'clock in the morning, and it would end about 2 o'clock in the morning. And it would be most of those times, like 10 minutes. And there was nothing about my day that didn't involve this. I think I was at university at the time. Yeah, I was doing my undergraduate degree. And I was trying to write a dissertation, but all of my day was like on a dating app, met a guy, masturbated. And if I couldn't meet my addiction through acting out, I would masturbate, because like, and until the point where like I couldn't anymore, because I needed to fill this void. So yeah, it was literally from morning to night, compulsively searching, compulsively acting out, finding the most risky situations. So just meeting someone for sex wasn't sufficient anymore. It had to be like in the middle of the night in a car, or like it had to be some really funky, dodgy, abusive thing. It had to be without a condom, or like it had to be risky. My body was like Russian roulette. And I remember saying to my friend, like, it's been 18 months and I've not fallen pregnant. And it almost became like a game. Like, wow, it was so messed up. And I hadn't caught any STIs. So I'm like, okay, so I'm still clean and I'm not pregnant. So it was like motivation to keep going. Like, it was just crazy. So yeah, so I did that for 18 months. Letting people film me, abuse me. And then I realized I had a problem when I was writing it down on this notebook, and how much it was taking up my time. And so this woman who was supporting me sort of said to me, you know, what do you want to do with the fact that you've learned that you're spending X amount of hours a day sexually? And I said, I don't know what I can do. And so we searched, and we found, at first I found a rehab, but in England, we pay, like the state helps quite a lot with drug and alcohol rehabs, but there's no help for sex stuff. And so the rehab I found was about 20 grand. And I remember saying to my mum, I think I have a problem with sex addiction, and somehow I need to get my hands on 20 grand to go to rehab. And obviously, I don't think she really knew what to do with this. It's like such a bombshell from your 21-year-old daughter. And we didn't like have a spare 20 grand floating around, but equally she was like, is there no other alternative? Is there no other way? That's a lot of money. And I was like, I am that desperate that if I can find a way to get 20 grand, I need to get this sorted. It's, you know, I can't write my dissertation. It was affecting, I was working a part-time job as well. I was like, it's affecting everything. I can't sleep. And in the end, I just kept searching on Google and I found SAA. And when I joined the rooms, it was really interesting because I went to a meeting, and the men, because it was all men in this meeting, they had no idea what to do with me. This 21-year-old woman has walked into this male-dominated room.
Yep.
And they were like, what do we do with her? Because there was women in recovery. There are a few women in the southwest of England who have been in recovery a really long time, but I wasn't living in that place of England at the time. And this particular rooms just didn't really know any women. They didn't know women in recovery. They just didn't know what to do. So one guy said, I feel safe enough to give this girl my number. Someone has to, if we can. And so this guy, bless him, he said, look, this is my number. And also, we have another meeting on a Wednesday. I'm happy to pick you up and take you to that meeting. And the men in those rooms are still, because of COVID and things going to Zoom, that is still the meeting I go to now, and I don't live near there anymore. But that was my home group, and it's still my home group, because those men at a time when I was 21, and they could have very easily seen that as an opportunity. They were sex addicts, I'm a sex addict, but they wrapped me in this unconditional love. Even those who had obviously all the right boundaries of not giving number, like there was one occasion where I acted out in a hotel and came straight to a meeting, and the guy who I just acted out with then cleared out the minibar, and I had paid for the room, so therefore the charges were on me. And I mentioned this after the meeting, and one guy, he phoned his then fiance, now wife, and said, this situation has happened and I'd like to drive to the hotel and talk to the hotel manager and try and help her out in this situation. And she said that was okay. So he did that and he paid my charges. Wow. And that for me was the first time any man had done something just out of unconditional love and no motivation. And I will always remember that experience as a time where a man for the first time showed me something so loving and so selfless. But equally, so they didn't know what to do with me. There was no women in those rooms. So I was coming, I was relating. It was great. People understood. I realized I was a sex addict. There was progress in that, but I was picking up white chips every week because I couldn't get a sponsor. And I only had this one guy's number. So I walked away from the rooms. I'm not entirely sure how long I went for, maybe about 8 months, and then walked away. And then at that point, I got pregnant, basically. So after all this time I hadn't. And then I walked away from the rooms and it happened. And I had that concept of like, this child can save me. You know, people in recovery always say, my wife can save me. My child can save me. You know?
Children,
Yeah. So I thought that's it.
Was that pregnancy within a committed relationship, or was that from an acting out experience?
I mean, I would say in reflection and acting out experience. So it was a relationship. It wasn't a one night stand, but it was a codependency choice almost to avoid acting out in other areas. So It wasn't a healthy relationship. It was like just convenience really and codependency. And I was pregnant within like 2 months. So we hadn't really got to know each other.
Wow.
So yeah, I would say that my son was born really of my addiction. And for a period, my son did kind of save me in the sense that it was hard although his dad is involved. In the early days, I was a single mother and I was breastfeeding. So my son depended on me a lot, and that worked to help keep me sober until he needed me less.
Yeah, it frees up your time.
Yeah. So as his dad was like, you know, now he's not so dependent on you for food, I can have him overnight. And that led me back straight to addiction very quickly. As soon as I had that freedom, it was like dating apps come back. And like anytime I didn't have my son, it's like, okay, so can I start a relationship with someone? Can I find someone to act out with? And so I found a relationship that wasn't healthy, and BDSM was like at the center of it. And then that of course ended because it wasn't a good idea. And my brain just had enough of living like this. And I just had this extreme breakdown. Like all the shame and all the behavior, it came too much. And I broke down so much. I was like almost sectioned. I was going in and out of A&E. I wanted to take my life. I was just so broken. And
what is A&E?
Oh, sorry. It's like ER. Like
okay.
Yeah. So it's like the emergency room. So when you're like, so for me it was like I was presenting so suicidal that I was basically going like, I'm going to kill myself. Please help me. They have mental health people there, like psychiatrists and stuff in England when you go there.
Nice.
But the psychiatrists kind of looked at me, and it's a great idea, but there's not enough funding. So You go, you present in this crisis, you tell them everything that's going on, and then they say, there's no beds in psych wards. So basically, like, call your GP tomorrow, or here's some medication, like, and then of course you just go back again and like nothing really happens. So yeah. And I did get like sort of a community mental health team around me. And they put some programs on for me and some therapeutic help. But yeah, but during this time, my son's dad was like, look, you're not in any fit state. I'm going to look after him for a while. And then through that point, I ended up meeting this guy. I went on, so the dating apps were becoming more and more dark. They weren't just kind of typical conventional dating apps. They were dodgy. And then I met this man who recruited me into the sex industry. And he did pitch it in a way that now is really obvious what was meant by it. But I was an addict, so even if I did know subconsciously, I pretended to ignore it, or B, I didn't know, but I was in a really unwell state mentally. So he basically said, I will give you £75 an hour to party with men. You don't need to do anything, just entertain them, and you'll get £75 an hour. Now, I was signed off sick from my job. I had managed to finish my degree amongst all this somehow miraculously, but I was signed off from my job. My son was no longer with me. So I thought, okay. And I remember turning up for the first time. And even that within itself was a risky behavior, because I didn't know this guy. I'd met him online, and I got straight into his car, and he drove me an hour away to one of the airports in England. And straight away we reached this B&B, and I remember thinking at that point, like, this is not a party. And he opened up the glove box, and there's loads of condoms inside, and I realized, like, this is what I'm here for. So I began escorting, and what actually transpired was the £75 was half. So I was taking £150 from the man and giving half to this pimp, which is, in the grand scheme of prostitution, an extremely high proportion of money. So it was completely exploitative. But when I realized that I'd sold my body for sex, like, once you've done that once, you can't retract that. Like, you've done that. You've gone that level. And so that night, I was an hour away from home by this airport, and the pimp said, like, I've set you up an online account. You've got more bookings tonight. And so I ended up going to these more bookings. And then the pimp also liked to kind of, or expected stuff himself. And then I'd go home, cry with shame. And because I'd opened I'd opened that gate, I was escorting, it kind of, like, it just carried on, because I'd gone to that level and my self-esteem was there, and I had nothing else in my life, because I'd ruined it with addiction. But so I decided to poach the clients for myself. So I'd meet the clients. I thought, well, this is a bit more healthy. At least I'll keep the whole 150. Maybe that's a better idea. But of course, that's insanity too. And it was through my time of escorting, very quickly into my time of escorting, because that became so compulsive. It was like every day I was available to work, and I put work in inverted commas because I don't think it's work now. But I was like available to do that all the time. I would fill all my time with being paid for sex, then come home, cry, feel shame, wish for my life to end, and then do it again. Like, it was that cycle.
Back in the addictive cycle. And this is all post being aware of SAA.
Yeah. So I think, although I knew the rooms were there and those men that I'd met were so fantastic, I guess because when I joined, there was no women. I related to them, but I hadn't worked any steps or had any contacts really. And I assumed that should I return, the situation would be the same. However, a few weeks into escorting, I thought that is the nearest thing I've ever got to hope, was those rooms. And even if nothing else, I can at least go and meet people who get this. So I decided to return. And by this point, I was living a little bit further away from those original rooms, but I decided, I know those men are safe. I'm going to drive and go to those rooms. So my meeting was a Monday night, and I would go to my meeting on a Monday, and then I would act out Tuesday to Saturday, and then I'd started going, and then I was invited to a church. So then it kind of went church Sunday, rooms Monday, act out Tuesday to Saturday. However, on my first visit back to the rooms, there was 2 people there who weren't there before. One was a woman who had literally joined the week before.
Oh, wow.
And one was a gay man. So both those people I could exchange numbers with. So suddenly I've returned and I had 2 people that I could contact. And the woman said, I have all these contacts of women throughout the UK. Do you want some numbers? And I was like, yes, please. And then I met all these women, especially from the Southwest, who have like, I don't know, 10 plus years. And yeah, so I was like, yes, please. So I got these numbers and I started going, and I didn't get a sponsor immediately because I think there was still a part of me that was like not quite ready. And because I was escorting, there was the money side to it as well. And this woman who had turned up in my rooms just said to me a few weeks in, look, you're picking up white chips every week. You're coming every Monday, but what is the point? You either want recovery or you don't. And it was a real tough love quote. It was a real tough love quote. But it was so true, because what was the point in me driving like 50 minutes to sit in the rooms to then act out again the next day? What was the point? She there was meaning in her words. And like there was nothing glamorous about escorting at all. So like I was just trying to justify it with kind of arguments at the time. And I was trying to justify it to even people in the rooms. Like it was ridiculous. But ultimately my validation was coming from the punters and the feedback of the punters on the websites. And just thinking, if I cut this out, where am I going to get any form of validation from? Like, who is going to love me? But what that woman said was like, yeah, that like really stayed with me. And it was at that point, it was Christmas time. Christmas time nearly 4 years ago. Yeah, so Christmas time 2017, that I said because I'd obviously found faith at 16 and I didn't really know what my faith was anymore, but I just said, like, I think I was in a relationship with a punter who was married whilst also I was escorting as well. And I was going to SAA and church, but like everything was, I was kind of like, I had my finger in all the pies. Like I wanted recovery, I wanted faith, but I also wanted addiction. So I was there. So I remember at Christmas and I just said, like, God, whatever God you are, if you exist, please show me I have more worth and value than this. And then that, at that point, kind of slowly tried to like stop my addiction. And by March 2018, I had left prostitution, and I had started to actually work a program. Nice. And it was then that things started to change.
So when you started to work the program, did you work it with some of the other women in the groups, or did you find a sponsor?
Yes. So I did have a sponsor. And it was really interesting because my sponsor was one of the women from the Southwest, which is about 3 hours from where I was living. And that was really good. And I remember driving down to do my step 1 in person. And on my drive, she had an emergency with her family or was sick or something. I can't even remember the context around it, but I was halfway there. So she phoned another woman and just said, like, who had strong sobriety, and said, like, my sponsor is on her way. Could one of you hear her step 1 if she's comfortable with it? It's not ideal, but I was halfway there. And I'd spent all this time preparing it. And so I did, and I went and I did my step 1 with this other woman who had really strong sobriety. And then I kind of thought, well, who's going to be my sponsor now? You know, but I think I was just relieved to get that out and do the step 1. And really, it was when I did 2 and 3 that my life actually changed, because I was going to church, but it was when I worked step 2 and 3 that I really surrendered to my higher power. And that's when, like, things actually started to shift. And yeah, my sponsor changed for reasons that weren't necessarily, like, they were all kind of real reasons, like either they left the fellowship or they had other commitments or whatever, but kind of went through a few different sponsors. So I remember when I got to 4 and 5, that was a really long process. At that point, I was being sponsored by a gay guy in the fellowship. And I really procrastinated over 4.
As do many.
And yeah, then kind of got past 4 and 5 and changed to a woman sponsor who then left. So my sponsor relationships have been a little bit colourful, which has been a bit frustrating. However, since January of this year, I've got a consistent sponsor who aligns with my values, and that is really helpful. But although I've had kind of different sponsors, I was just grateful that there were women and gay men that could sponsor me, and for whatever reasons they weren't working out, whether they were leaving or had other commitments or whatever was happening, at least I was working the steps, even though the person was changing. Yeah, like, for me, the most successful thing and the best thing from recovery has been that surrender process. And any time that I've been tempted to act out in the last 3.5 years, it has been when I've not worked a program, or when I've not aligned with my faith, or a combination of both. Do you want me to carry on with kind of the things that I was going to say, or?
Oh, yeah. I have some more questions for towards the end and some stuff, but yeah, keep going.
Okay, so I recognized that in the last 3 years, sort of my sex addiction then did turn into codependency a little bit, because I basically had this real black and white thinking of, I've stopped being a whore, I'm ready to be a wife. So kind of back to that thinking that I grew up with, that that the wife always loses and the whore always wins. I thought, right, well, I've stopped being a whore, I'm ready to be a wife. So I didn't really quit dating apps, but I wasn't acting out off dating apps. Yeah, I changed my drive from finding someone to have sex with to trying to find a biblical husband. And it was real black and white thinking. But dating is an extremely dangerous situation for me, which I've realized and recognized. And that's why I've now changed my inner circle behaviors to align with my faith. Because like, I would date men and then suddenly I'd disappear from the rooms, and that's just ridiculously risky. So now it's really important to me that my inner circle is defined by my faith, which is to wait until marriage for sex. And so that's why I chose, when I made that my inner circle, and made masturbation in my inner circle, and kind of anything that fell outside of that boundary of marriage, I changed that in January of this year, and I wanted to find a Christian sponsor who could help me with that, because with that comes additional things that, you know, in recovery we bookend things, but it's also a very kind of biblical principle of like, if I was to date someone, and I'm not on dating apps now, and I've not been on dating apps for 8 months, and that's something that I want to stay off for now, but if a natural situation arose where, I don't know, a guy in my church asked me out, then my sponsor would help me to not be on my own in a flat or house with him, and things like that, to maintain that value until marriage. And also, I really am trying to enjoy a season of singleness, that because when I sort of put down my sex addiction, relationships became the focus. I'm just trying to enjoy just me and God, until such a time as a natural situation arises that my higher power puts in place for me to date, rather than me trying to seek it. But steps 2 and 3 really changed my life. And what also keeps me sober and what keeps me coming back to the rooms is the men in the program. Because I've known some of these men that still come to my meetings for 7 years, and they teach me so much unconditional love, and they have helped me heal my trauma. So like, I never really got to a trauma therapist that helped me get to the bottom of some of my stuff. I never really found the right person, or it never really worked for me. But having healthy relationships with men in the fellowship within really strict boundaries heals my trauma. It's just incredible. They also, and this often makes them cry when I say this in shares, but the men in the rooms, with their recovery, with their qualities, with the way that they've worked on themselves through recognizing their defects and working through their shortcomings, they represent, as a collective, qualities I'd want in my husband.
Wow.
Which is just so, and that really makes them emotional, because obviously some of them may have had issues, you know, with their marriage, but all of what they're presenting as now is like, wow, like it's these men as a collective making one man that is what I would look for. And gratitude lists have also changed my life, because like the moral of the story is that when I was in my addiction, I was just in my pity party. Like, I was in shame, like, I'm an addict, like, pity me. But actually, when I shift that to what I'm grateful for, like, there's victory. And my pastor says, like, you can't live in the victory of Christ if you're in the pity party of life. And that really was true for me. It's like, if I'm choosing to surrender to my higher power and have the joy and peace of my higher power, a program of recovery, and what I believe in as a faith, then I can't stay in my pity party forever. It doesn't work. You can't have both. So the gratitude list helps redirect that.
Yeah, I've been trying to teach that to my son. Is a lesson that I learned, that, you know, when I'm angry at the world, and just, you know, nothing is going right, everything sucks, write down 3 things that you're grateful for. And you know, so he'll be complaining about this or this or this, and it's like, yeah, but what are some of the things that are going right? Let's, you know, kind of reframe things. And it's definitely helped me. There was one day I was just so pissed off driving home from work. Stuff at work wasn't going well. Someone had just cut me off in traffic, and it's like, okay, gratitude list. And I look up in the sky and see some birds flying, and I noticed a few trees that I'd taken for granted, you know, thousands of times on my commute. And I can just like refocus, recenter myself, and say, oh yeah, there are some beautiful things, and helps kind of bring the situation down and calms me down. So yeah, gratitude lists are great.
It's such a life lesson. And it's actually something that, so when me and my son say, like, we don't say a traditional grace when we eat dinner, we say what we're thankful for. And then we always say we're also thankful for the food. But we always say one thing we're thankful for that day, because I want his focus to be that gratitude, just like you said. With your child, it's like that stuff needs to really be taught and embedded from the off, because it is life-changing. And I work the steps via the Patrick Kahn's book, A Gentle Path. And there's, in step 2 or 3, I can't remember, of that, it's like, it asks you to envisage you have 1 year left to live. And that really helps you define what is the point of living? Like, what are your priorities in life? And if you had 1 year left to live, how would you live it? And that was so powerful to me. And then there's also another section, it might also be in step 2 and 3 as well, where it asks you to record a voice recording of some affirmations, positive affirmations, spiritual affirmations. And mine is like an accumulation of the step 9 promises, which is my favorite part of recovery. And kind of, some spiritual affirmations and, stuff my higher power says about me. And you listen to that back before bed, and it keeps you in that affirmation state. And daily meditation books as well. And step 4 helps me recognize that none of this is because I love sex. Like, none of this is because I just really want to have sex with people. It's because of defects. And that was like such a revelation to me. But also, like, the fellowship has taught me how to be of service to others. I'm secretary of my home group, but like, my service to others goes beyond that. Like, I disciple other women in kind of all forms of addiction. I'm in this kind of women's ministry, and they could be in any kind of fellowship. And it's just about kind of, helping them kind of within the Christian faith. But also, like, in my job, like what I do for work is really to be of service for others. I just think that, like, when you walk away from the program or the fellowship, like, it's really risky. And when you come back, it really does work it. But what I was saying about the healthy friendships with men as well is that, like, they help me. I mean, this is something that I wrote down that's really powerful to me, but it's so true that I realized that although I am not married, I am not a wife. I don't become a wife when my future spouse meets me. I'm walking in qualities now that are wifely, and the whore is dead and buried. The whore didn't win. The addict doesn't win. The recovered person has the victory. And that is, like, because of what the men in recovery have taught me. And like, my relationship with my son has been restored. We have pretty much like a shared care arrangement now. I like spent some time with this Christian man who was extremely attractive, and I did go to his flat, but I didn't stay there, and like, we went out into the garden and had some food there, and I bookended that with my sponsor. But that really showed me that I can sit in a space of an attractive man and there just be nothing sexual. And COVID has kind of like taught us, like, to be 2 meters apart. And that was a really useful thing to use in recovery. Like, we can sit 2 meters apart and we're quite safe. The platonic male friendships that, like, I've learned how to have that, which just sounds so ridiculous. Like, people should just have like relationships and friendships with the opposite sex. But that is like a revelation to me. And I think, like, sort of when we were talking about the outer circle earlier, like, I can be present in the moment with my son. When I'm not in a meeting or working a program, I'll be at church, or I'll be discipling other women, spending time with my higher power, going to the gym, enjoying time out in the beauty of nature. and I'll have little praise parties in my living room. Like I'll kick the furniture around, not literally, but I'll move the furniture around. I'll put some like worship music on, and I'll just literally dance and sing and like just a praise party. And like I used to be a traumatized individual with no hope or joy, but like I've just got so much to be thankful for. And I also feel as though like I used to just survive one day at a time, but like the program helps me really thrive one day at a time. And that's the difference.
Awesome. That's brilliant. I love being able to have those moments of connecting with music. Music is my higher power. So having those moments, just by yourself and dancing, it's so, I can't think of what the word is. Just the emotional release that you can get from being in that state is awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to talk about, you're talking about there towards the end here, was about having platonic relationships with the other sex, and it goes back to kind of a couple of different things. Is the retention of women in meetings. A lot of times, a woman will show up in a room of men, be there for a while, and then leave. And then, when other women come in, there's no other people to relate to, like what you were talking about when the woman was there and the gay man was there, is to have those initial people there to connect with safely. Some of my meetings are men's only meetings. I predominantly have gone to mixed meetings, but they've been mostly men. And when women come in, there's been a few times where I've been triggered and I've been able to talk to my program friends and sponsor about me working my own stuff through and welcoming the woman into the room, and to be able to have women there consistently, to cultivate a healthy relationship, I think is so important. And why, one of the reasons why I really am so grateful that you reached out to be on the podcast is to have more women's voices. We are getting a lot more. Just a few weeks ago, I posted an episode with the first woman in SAA.
I listened to that.
Yeah. And that was just amazing. But to the level of fear when you're in a safe environment with just, a lot of times men will say, well, there's a women's group over here, why don't you go to that, instead of welcoming women into that room and to find a way to relate safely. We did that with one woman, which turned into two women, which turned into four women. And for a long time, we had about 4 or 5 women that would show up at my home room. And this is, all pre-COVID. And the relationships that we were able to solidify in a healthy way is, so important. And, when you express gratitude for the men in your meetings that helping you get healthy, I think you being there in the rooms helps them get healthy as well. So that importance is so integral to how we relate to people in the real world, not just in our safe little rooms.
Definitely. And they share that back quite a lot. And actually that woman I mentioned who came in a few weeks before, she's now moved. And so it is now me that is the only regular woman at that meeting. And we've split ourselves now. So like we have a physical meeting and a Zoom meeting, but as a collective, because we are still kind of one room, if you like, there's about 35 regular people and I'm the only woman. but I would not change that now. Like, I wouldn't opt for a women's only meeting. I would stay in this home group. And I've never been to a women's only meeting. Well, I've been to a women's tele meeting, but I've never been to a physical women's meeting or a Zoom one, just a tele meeting. And I don't think many in the UK exist, but I think there are positive and negatives of both. I think that there's benefits of mixed meetings and there's benefits of like women only meetings. But I would choose for a mixed meeting any day. I'm not quite sure. And I know there's been a lot of kind of thought as to how to make meetings more safe for women. And I'm not really sure. But what I will say is that I did change the sort of meeting boundaries at one point in my home group, because actually, like, as much as we talk about kind of or I was conscious of how I was dressing to not be triggering to men, equally, like, if a man's there in really tight shorts, or, you know, like, that works both ways. And I think helping men to realize that it's triggering both ways. And there's a really good film. I'm not sure if I'm meant to mention it, but the film Thanks for Sharing.
Yeah.
And when I saw that woman go and join their rooms and change numbers with the guy, instantly I was like, you can't do that. That's going to end up being chaotic. But you could see how beautiful that friendship progressed. And I don't think, you know, I think the boundaries of not having numbers of people that could potentially be attractive to you is really good. It's a firm boundary that's really healthy. But I've enjoyed, like, we in our home group in pre-COVID times, we would always go for a curry after a step one. And we'd often go for a curry after a share, and we'd have curry Christmas. It was always curry. We loved an Indian.
Awesome.
But yeah, so there was times where I would socialize with these men. It wasn't just in a meeting context. But yeah, I'm not quite sure what else can be done. But I think when I liked what, I'm not sure if you said it or, but it was in that podcast with the first woman in SAA to talk about inventory of the meeting. And I think that's really important, because I think if a meeting is safe and sober and boundaries are kept, I think women will come back if they are a sex addict and they want recovery. And I think now there are increasingly more women in the recovery, even if there's not another woman in your fellowship. I think the men know more how to reach those women for you. So often, like, through perhaps a gay man or whatever, there is a way that you can swap those numbers between and communicate messages until women get other women's numbers. But there's also now this like website, and there's like women servants, and so there is much more ways that women can get connected to other women. But actually now I have a kind of, my sponsor's a man, cross-gender sponsoring works for us, but I have quite a few women in SAA's numbers on my phone, but I only really call a few of them, some ones that I've really grown close to. And my sponsor, yeah, I don't need loads and loads of women. I just need, you know, enough.
Yeah, enough to connect with, and you know, there are definite times where connecting with another woman would be more beneficial than connecting, you know, talking with a man. But yeah, the when you talk about going out for curry, we used to go out for we would center around a Starbucks, but there would be other food places. There's a pizza place, Chinese place, and place for burritos, and we'd all go hang out after the meeting, and it was probably 10 or 12 of us, and just a complete mix of probably 50-50 men and women, and being able to socialize outside of the rooms, you know, really got us interested in each other's lives and feeling safe around each other. And you know, we stopped doing that even before COVID. You know, sometimes, you know, people's lives get busy, and as soon as the meeting's over, I got to get home, you know, especially as their kids are getting older and stuff. But just having time for socialization outside the rooms was, just the fellowship that we have is really helped me solidify relationships with other people in the program, no matter what the sex or orientation. Is really awesome just to have solidify friendships rather than this is someone that I see once a week.
Yeah, and also it goes beyond the addict. We're about recovery, not just like, we're not just people in 12-step like recovery. We're not just addicts. We are people trying to actually live life, and that's really important as well.
When you talked about being a sex worker, and your initial emails with me, thinking, asking if you would be a good guest for the podcast, being a former sex worker. I think that is just so important to hear. We were at my annual retreat. This is several years ago. So we usually have about 150 to 200 people there, and this large meeting room. And there are some meetings where people get to, sometimes we have a speaker, sometimes we have spots for people just to get up and share whatever's on their mind. And there was one woman there who was a former sex worker, and when she was just so nervous to be in front of 200 people and talk about what her experience was like, in 3 minutes, so many in that people in that room were there because they used sex workers. And to hear and see the trauma that was caused from being a sex worker, what that the other side was like, is I never thought that that's a person and not just an object of just floored a bunch of people. And my sponsee, one of my sponsees, got up right after her and said, you completely shifted my perspectives. So getting able to hear stories like yours, of what it's like to be a sex worker, and that the addictive mentality that goes into that as well. And so hearing that flip side is so important.
Yeah, and that's what the men regularly sort of share back, that I make it more personal, that but what I say is that so my reflections of this, so I'm now like a sex trade abolitionist. I campaign against the sex trade. I believe that it's inherently abusive. It's not just a case of basically, when an exchange of money is there for sex, it's like consent is questionable, and it's not just sex. It's like you are there to undertake whatever, basically. And so I'm really passionate about that, and it sort of is where my whole purpose in life is sort of driven by now. But it's not, people often say like, a happy ending in relation to kind of buying sex. It's like a happy ending, but it's anything but happy for the person being paid. But equally, another reason why I am so for abolishing the sex trade is because the men who bought me for sex were miserable too. Like, not just the men in the recovery meetings that I know now, but the men who used to buy me for sex, like, I was like a therapist. They would cry. It was a broken person paying for broken person. It was just, yeah. Because I'm not saying that every punter was abusive within themselves. I'm not saying that every punter was a bad person, but I don't believe that happy, healthy people buy sex, and I don't think that happy, healthy people sell sex. There's a reason why that transaction occurs on both sides. And I think men who buy sex need a holistic understanding about the reality of life for the women. And the women also kind of need their eyes opening to what's going on in the man's life it's like this weird plethora of like emotional issue. Like these two broken people are meeting each other. Neither of them, because I don't think many men buy sex because of sex. I think it's because of power or emotion or control or addiction or something else that's driving them. So it's like, I'm buying this thing to try and feed my thing, to try and feed your thing, but none of us really want the money or the sex it's just bizarre.
Yeah. Wow.
So I feel just as strongly about helping women who are currently in the sex trade to leave as I do men stopping buying sex, because I believe that most men who buy sex, or most men who I met who bought sex, were there was something about them that wasn't happy either.
Yeah, so true. I also wanted to touch on the BDSM aspect. I'm just curious if you got into that to twofold. One was the endorphin rush from pain, and the other is, are you working through childhood trauma through the pleasure pain principle, and anything like that?
Yeah, so I think it was like a trauma response. And I think, again, both parties in a BDSM situation is typically playing out some form of trauma dynamic. I think that's really rife in BDSM situations. And I think, yeah, the same for any kind of like funky fantasy or whatever. It was the danger, and the endorphins were coming from finding the most risky, dangerous, because the addiction is progressive, right? And so like once we've done certain things, it's like, okay, I've done that, let's find the new thing, the new hit. It's like with drugs. Like, I'm not saying everyone who smokes cannabis then ends up on heroin, but for some there's a natural quick progression. And it's the same. It's like normal sex is not enough. Like, it's got to be sex with pain or whatever. And I think that yeah, I think the pain thing really kind of came from the abusive situation when I was 14, because I was raped several times, and yeah, he tried to take my life. It was physically very abusive. So I associated sex with pain and abuse. But this time round, in a BDSM contract, or in a situation where I was being paid for sex, it felt like I was choosing it. So it felt like I was in control this time. But actually, I wasn't really, and it didn't really help anything at all. And it just made it worse, and it increased the shame and increased the trauma. But yeah, I think it was both the things you said. I think it's trying to find something new, find something exciting, and I think at the root of that is low self-worth. Is that like I almost deserved it, which is really sad. But yeah, and I think when it was a BDSM relationship and it was at the root of the relationship, it meant that I didn't have to have a real, genuine emotional intimacy with that person. So it was kind of an intimacy avoidance.
Yeah. The whole BDSM thing is, it's kind of a strange thing for me. I've been exploring it more in my relationship with my wife. I don't talk about it a lot at meetings, but there is a certain level of intimacy that is required to fulfill a healthy BDSM type of situation. And so it's actually brought us more into communicating more about things, pre and post, what's okay, what's not. But it's not, we aren't going outside of the relationship to find this. We're finding, exploring different things, and sometimes it's fucking scary because it quickly goes off the rails, and it's like, I didn't feel comfortable with that, and trying to work through that healthfully is difficult, but it led to an intimacy between us that we could sit there and talk about it, and try to figure out what was okay and what was not, what we liked and what we don't, but it opened up conversation rather than it being kind of an abusive thing. It's kind of a back and forth, but yeah, I'm not sure where it comes from in me, but I know where it comes from in her, and I'm not going to share that here on the podcast. But that's what kind of led me to those questions.
But equally, I don't know if there's any difference, but you are in a marriage,
yes.
and so there is layers there, and I guess because I'm still really defining what I mean. I know that I want sex within a context of marriage, but what healthy sexuality looks like within a marriage, I don't know. And that is something that although I'm not in any situation, I'm not engaged, there's no one on the horizon. I think to myself, at the point of marriage, is it anything goes? Am I going to get married and it's going to arise my addiction? I don't know what to expect in that, and I think that that's something that I will be very mindful of when I get into a situation where that is likely to become a reality soon, because I think there's also this fear in me that like sex is really associated with performance because of the sex industry, that like how do I have sex, can you have sex without it being a bit like a performance, and what is healthy sexuality, and that's something that crosses my mind and I think about, and I wonder, however, I do know and believe that if I'm married, the situation and context is entirely different because there's that commitment there, and it's not based on sex, it's not based on addiction, it's based on that loving commitment.
And lastly, the what you had brought up about your the men in your home group, and the tying to getting married, and to figure out what you want out of a relationship, and to see the character assets in these men who are working recovery. How brilliant is that to be able to see other men working at stuff to define healthy character assets, and to give you a guideline to what you're actually looking for. That just warmed my heart when you mentioned that, and how the guys in your group reacted. So
it's so beautiful. And I had and men, one of the men said to me, I suddenly realized that when because I was talking about a dating situation, and he said, I suddenly realized that when you were sharing about that dating experience, I'm so protective of you that to me, no man will ever be good enough for you. And that was like this protective father, brother, uncle thing of the fellowship, that actually I have these men that genuinely care. And my sponsor has said to me, because I have a tendency to be attracted to addicts, whether they're, like recovered addicts or whatever. There's some, something. And my sponsor said, is that healthy for you? And like, that's something that I'm considering as well. But these men don't just care like because I'm in there, they genuinely care about who I will end up with. And it's almost like when I meet my future husband, they've kind of got to get like typically you'd get your father's approval in the old days,
Mm-hmm.
but this guy, whoever he is, kind of got to get like approval from my father, perhaps,
Mm-hmm.
or my stepfather. But most importantly, he's got to get approval from my pastor and my fellowship, even without necessarily meeting him. Like, even if it's indirectly, it's like they have become my kind of protective dads and brothers, and it's just beautiful.
Awesome. So we are, well past an hour here.
Sorry.
No worries. That's what I was saying, before we started recording, it can be as, short as a half an hour or as long as an hour and a half. So it's just kind of wherever the conversation is going. And, this has been awesome. Is there anything that you've wanted to add, things that we may have left out? Because we covered a lot, but just wanted to offer any extra time to things that that you might want to talk about.
I don't think so. Yeah, I think just the main summary points is that, like, the step 9 promises come true, and yeah, working the program works. And like, for me, surrendering to God changed everything. Yeah, that's my highlights.
So we're going to be doing an episode on the step 9 promises, and I would totally invite you to be on that panel, but we're going to be recording it at nighttime here on the west coast of the US, so would be in the early morning hours for you. Is there anything about the 9 step promises specifically that you want to add here? The fear of economic insecurity leaving.
I mean, all of it. I mean, like, yeah, I guess money can be a trigger for me, having had like a lot of cash in hand money. But when you surrender, you like, I do believe you are blessed. Like, it really, really has come true. And like, yeah, that one is one for me. You'll be amazed before you're halfway through. And I apply that to other things as well. So like, at the moment, I'm going through this like time off dating apps, and like, I'm amazed by the time I'm halfway through. Just all of it will comprehend the word serenity and will know peace. Like, that's so true for me. And no matter how far down the scale we've gone, like, I use my experience to benefit others in every aspect of my life. That has become my purpose, and it's become my drive. And like, I don't need to sit in that shame anymore. I can use, and I was down that scale, so just, I love the step 9 promises. I remember 7 years ago when I was in, but hadn't started working the program, that was what I clung to. Was every meeting we say these step 9 promises, and I believe that the men in these rooms really believe them, and that stuck with me, and that was my hope that I clung to when I returned.
Awesome. Yeah, sharing our stories here on the podcast is giving our experience to others in the program. So I am so thankful that you reached out and wanted to share your story with the rest of the podcast community. I'm thankful for your time here today, and thank you so much, Megan.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Many thanks to Megan for reaching out and being a guest here on the podcast. I was really grateful to be able to meet her and have this wonderful conversation. And it was also really nice to hear a different perspective, getting to hear from a sex worker and to hear her perspectives on what it's like being trapped in that cycle of addiction. The line that she had there towards the end of the conversation about hurt people buying hurt people, that just really stood out for me. And Whew, it was a moment for me. Most of my addictive behaviors have been with pornography and voyeurism, so I haven't really experienced the paying for sex, but I know several people in the program who have. Although now that I think about it, the strip clubs that I attended, I definitely think that counts. Anyway, great conversation. Before closing out this episode, I wanted to add a little bit of music, and over the past couple of episodes that I've shared music, it's been on the heavier side, and I wanted to throw in some acoustic guitar music, and this is from Marc Broussard, a song called My God. When I was working on steps 6 and 7, working on one of my mix CDs, this is a song that really came to me, and I turn to it when I'm in need of getting out of myself and needing help from my higher power. And so I'll play a little clip here, and I think I'll play a little bit of the second verse. Just so much of the song is just really touching and incredibly soulful.
My God, heal this sin-stained soul. I give my life to you. Take me and make me whole. My God, I'm lost and so alone, drowning in a sea of desolation. Help me find my way back home. My God, oh, you are the way, the truth, and the life. Burn over me, Lord, send your might. Oh, I can do nothing without you. With your strength this dark night, I'll get through. I'll get through. My God,
I really hope you appreciated that. I love this piece. I originally found Marc Broussard when he sang the song Home at benefit for New Orleans, and his music is just really soulful and touching. You know, like I said before I shared this clip, that I wanted to touch on music that is kind of more mainstream and less heavy, less further out there. I listen to lots of different types of music, so this was a mellow one that really touches me. Since we haven't received any feedback this week, I'll close out the episode. And if you do want to provide feedback for the podcast, you can rate and review us on iTunes. You can email us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. And if you want to be a guest or a panelist on a future episode, you can contact me at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. And thank you for listening. And as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.